Welcome to COVID Unmasked. I am Julia Jordan Zachary. I want to offer a little bit of a trigger warning. Listener discretion is advised. Some episodes may touch on troubling topics such as self harm, including cutting. We talk about loss and death, might be hints of sadness. So I encourage you all to do what you need to do in order to take care of your spirit as you engage with us in Black women's journeys through COVID-19. When Black women show up, we bring our wisdom, resilience, and more importantly, we bring our truth.
She wasn't personified just into one woman. She seemed all too familiar to me, almost as if she was family.
Grab your tea. Welcome again to COVID Unmasked, where today we have an amazing guest that is going to walk us through what it means to be an elderly Black woman during a time of COVID. As is the norm, I don't introduce our guests. I allow our guests to introduce themselves because, we Black women can speak our truth. So I'm going to turn it over to our guests today to have them introduce themselves.
Thank you. Hi, I am so glad to be here. My name is Akita. I am a licensed clinical therapist practicing in the state of North Carolina. My direct focus is older adults, and I am an older adult, so I'm grateful to be here and share my experience.
Thank you. Thank you for coming on to talk about COVID Unmasked and the elderly, right? And specifically elderly Black women. So, we organized some questions that we're going to pose, but this conversation is going to go where it needs to go so that we could be in service to elderly Black women, but also those caring for elderly Black women. So let's start with this first question. Have you noticed any unique challenges or strengths among older Black women in coping with the isolation or fear that COVID brought? What was that kind of experience for this population?
A lack of access. There was definitely an increase in depression and anxiety around the isolation, a lot of hopelessness and helplessness. Older adults didn't have access to care. And then there was also that it was like a fear of trust. Culturally, we don't trust the systems. And so where folks would find their comfort, they were not able to get to. So we find comfort in our churches, different communities, but because of the isolation, we were stripped of that. There was the fear of trusting the injections. There was a lot of talk and thought and feelings about how safe it was because it brought up being tested, not being aware that they were being tested, how safe is this? Is this true that something that I need to take, or is this some trickery or, something that they're using to, I guess, take us out?
Right. So how did you even begin to talk the elderly through that, right? Because I know that some of them are tech savvy and have internet and things of that nature, but
some are not.
And some are not, right? So how did you even begin to walk people through that?
Some had to tap into their spirituality. Because that was the opportunity for trust and faith. And so we worked a lot with that part because what was going to be was going to be. And so if you say that you're spiritual, then it's a time for practical application. Tap into that. How does your spirituality play into it? Do you believe that the universe, the God of your understanding or whatever, is going to protect you and guide you? Try to find comfort in that. So it was up and down with that. There was still that leery look of, I'm still not sure. But the key component, I think, to the isolation and the depression was mortality.
Okay. Tell me more. Tell me more.
They started seeing and thinking about their own mortality. A lot of people were dying, they couldn't
Mhm.
get to them.
Mhm.
Those that were caring for older adults, say in facilities,
Mhm.
skilled nursing facilities, whatever, they
Mhm.
couldn't get to them.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so that connection was lost. And then you
Mhm.
talk about being savvy, technically, they didn't have access to computers or iPads or
Mhm.
FaceTime.
Mhm. Mhm.
Either they didn't have it
Mhm.
or they were just, I'm going to say, too old or out of that thing. Because I know my mom,
Mhm.
so funny, she was
Mhm.
101, and we
Mm.
were trying to get her to do FaceTime.
Right,
And
right.
so, no matter what we're saying to her, and she's in her right mind, she's putting the phone to her ear.
Right. Right.
And
Because
so
that's what
it's
she's
like,
used to.
yeah, and so it's a breakdown in communication. So during COVID, there was quite a bit of that disconnect. And that raised a lot of angst because people wanted to get to their loved ones and
Mhm.
they couldn't. And
Mhm.
all you heard was all of this negativity. Well, not
Mhm.
negativity because it was real, of all of
Mhm.
the people dying.
Right, right, right.
Um,
Mhm.
and what does that look like for me?
Mhm. Mhm.
Am I going to be in that situation?
Right. Am I gonna die alone?
Right,
Kind of thing.
right.
Yes.
That was the thing.
Mhm.
Not only am I going to die alone, but my loved ones are dying alone.
Right. Mhm. Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so it's hard.
Really?
It's hard.
So I know we're talking about your work with elderly Black women, but how did you even manage that as a therapist? What was that like for you?
So for me, okay, so typically, or I'm going to say culturally, we
Mhm.
are clean people.
Right, right.
We are clean people.
Mhm.
You go to the cookouts and it's like, man, who cooked that? Ah, no, they're not very clean, so I'm not
Right.
gonna eat that. So that's what I mean
Mhm.
by we are clean people. And
Mhm.
so the washing of the hands and all of the things that were being suggested were things that we did anyway.
Mhm.
But for me, I felt like after I started reflecting, it was like, oh, I might be OCD with this. Might be overkill. Every corner there was, the hand sanitizer,
Uh-huh.
the gloves, the mask,
Mm.
don't touch my stuff, don't breathe on it. And I was constantly wiping and cleaning.
Mhm.
That kept me safe. But at the same time, it was like when I reflect on it, I
Mhm.
give a little chuckle and it's like, did you go overboard?
Mhm.
And the reason why I say that too is I had a client, older adult, and I could see myself in some of the things that she was doing out of
Mhm.
fear.
Out of fear.
Um,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah, out
Mhm.
of
Mhm.
fear.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
say that it's funny now. Her husband had to go out of town.
Mhm.
She was all up in arms about that,
Mhm.
and so when he came back, she would spray people as they came into the house, just spray them down. Well, when he
Right.
came, she picked him up from the airport.
Uh-huh.
She sprayed him down before he got in the car, and she said, "Baby, you can't come home. You gotta check into a hotel and isolate for 3 to 4 days before you
Wow.
can come home,"
Right, right.
out of fear.
Out of fear. Out of fear.
And that was one of the things that I would speak about to try to help folks to reduce that anxiety,
Mhm. Mhm.
reduce those emotions, because stress is disease.
Right, right.
And
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
while it's counterproductive that we are so stressed out about becoming infected, or
Mhm. Mhm.
becoming that,
Mhm.
that we break down our immune system.
Right, you end up causing the harm that you are
Right,
trying to.
right.
Right,
Mhm.
right, right.
Yeah,
How do you even get people psychologically to wrap their heads around that? Yes, you need to be precautious. You're not saying not to be precautious,
mhm,
but there's a point where it becomes, bring out my economist self, diminishing returns, right?
mhm,
Right, where
mhm.
the precautions begin to turn back on you. Like,
Right.
how do you even get people to accept that, right? Because it feels like it's counterintuitive almost. Mhm.
Yes, yes. And so it's a matter of just pointing that out and going back. And, words are powerful.
Mhm.
And so it's looking at the words. And so looking at disease and
Mhm.
being dis-ease and just
Mhm.
talking through that word and how disease is formed. And
Mhm.
so if you look at it from that perspective and then you add COVID in there, COVID is disease,
Mhm. Mhm.
and so if you're stressed out, you're opening yourself up to this.
Mhm.
So you
Mhm.
want to be as calm and as knowledgeable and, do the things that is being suggested to
Mhm.
reduce that.
Mhm.
So you
Mhm.
can't just say, chill out. It's going to be
Right.
okay.
That wasn't your approach.
No, sit down, girl. No. Pray it'll go away. No.
What's coming through to me
Mhm,
is a kind of you have this cultural reference, this cultural knowledge of how older Black women walk through the world, right?
mhm.
And what do you think COVID has taught us about having that kind of cultural reference, that cultural knowledge, in order to be able to speak to this population, like you started with, that was a little bit, I don't know if I can trust these people.
Mhm,
Right? So,
mhm.
how did that play a role for you, if at all, in helping this population work their way through COVID?
Reflecting on the things that we have come through. And I
Hmm.
say we because as an older Black woman, I experienced those things too. The questioning, is this valid? Is this
Hmm.
true for us
Hmm.
as a people? Just walking back
Hmm.
and trying to open up trust. Okay, so if this isn't true for us,
Hmm.
what will be the outcome? If
Oh.
it if it's true for us, what
Hmm.
will be the outcome?
Hmm. Hmm.
Own your power. And
Hmm.
so the power is in making a knowledgeable choice for yourself and
Hmm.
trusting. It is more of what the conversation went around.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, what does this mean for us as a people? Where are our resources? How can we reach out and how can we help each other?
Hmm.
Where can we find a little bit of community? Because
Hmm.
so much of it was being kind of spread apart and try to walk through it that way.
Hmm.
Once we do all that we can do, using our natural resources.
Hmm.
Okay, so you don't trust the medications, you don't trust the injections that they're offering. What can you do?
Right. Asking questions.
Right. You can ask questions. We
Hmm.
can go to our natural resources
Hmm.
because we have plenty of that.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, Culturally, we are attuned to nature, I
Hmm.
think.
Hmm.
And I say I think because I don't want to speak for everybody,
Right. We're not
but
generalizing.
right, but from
Mhm.
what I know, we
Mhm.
are culturally attuned to nature because that's what we grew up with as African Americans.
Mhm.
We know how to use lemon and
Right, right.
all of the natural remedies, the teas and different
Mhm.
things like that.
Mhm.
And so that too was another way of walking through it.
Oh. Mhm.
If you don't subscribe to the injections,
Mhm.
then do the natural path of
Mhm.
what you can to protect yourself.
Right, right. Calling in that knowledge, right?
Mhm,
That
mhm,
kind of Black ancestral knowledge of how to use herbs and roots and things of that knowledge, right? And things of that nature that can help
mhm,
us as
mhm.
Black women feel a little bit more comfortable. And I noticed that you said about power, right? How do we hold on to our power when everything around us feels as though it's kind of falling apart? And what it feels to me that you suggested was you use what's available to you and you find that in community.
Yes,
Right?
yes,
Yes. Hmm.
yes.
Yeah, I love that.
Um,
Thank you. So let me ask you, now that allegedly we are post COVID, and I don't believe that we're post COVID, but how has the experience of COVID influenced older Black folks seeking therapy?
seeking mental health might have been a sidebar. They were
Tell me
seeking
more.
connection,
Oh, okay.
seeking connection. They were desperate for that
Um,
human interaction, I think. In that, it was like wherever I can get it, because
mhm, mhm,
this idea of this illness and everybody dying around me and I might be next, and what do I do? And I can't reach out to this one or that one.
mhm,
With telehealth being available, talking on the telephone,
mhm, mhm,
being available is, I think, one of the benefits that came out of the COVID isolation for older
mhm,
adults, even
mhm,
though I said earlier they didn't have access to the telehealth, but
mhm.
they did have it. When I say video, they did have access to phones.
Right, right.
And so
Mhm,
when they spoke to their PCPs, or when they were able to talk to somebody else, maybe a family member,
mhm.
that might have been a suggestion, and they reached out.
And they reached out. Oh,
Yeah,
mhm,
yeah. It's like I
mhm,
need to talk to somebody, because
mhm,
this right here in this house, it's not working. Being separated, it's not working, or
mhm,
even being congested in
mhm,
area, it was not working.
mhm,
They needed
mhm,
outlets. They couldn't go to church and have an outlet. They couldn't go to their centers or
mhm.
any of those things for an outlet. Everybody was just packed in.
Right, right. So that kind of removal of community. So I think one thing I think COVID has taught me, as though I needed to be taught this again, is was the value of community, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And how particularly, and again, I'm not saying other groups or don't have this desire, but I think there's something really special about Black women in community, and you kind of see it at church,
Mhm.
at a church, or you see it in other arenas around how they give and receive care.
For
Right.
sure.
Yeah, so I could only imagine what that must have felt like.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, what long-term mental health effects do you predict older Black women might experience as a result of the pandemic? What kind of mental health effects are you seeing or that you might predict as a result of the pandemic?
There's still the anxiety.
Increased anxiety.
Mhm. Increased anxiety and depression.
Mm,
There's a lot of sadness around the experiences that one has had,
mhm,
be it
mhm,
the caregivers or the older adults themselves being isolated and just hearing and seeing all of the death.
mhm,
That trauma, it doesn't just go away. That grief just doesn't go away.
mhm,
There are things that have come back to re-traumatize them or trigger it.
mhm, mhm,
So it's a lot about learning how to manage that.
mhm,
Grief has no expiration date.
mhm,
It
mhm.
comes and it goes, and so it's just a matter of talking to it, but it hasn't gone away. It's
Right,
just
right,
compounded, I believe.
right. Right. The grief of the pandemic, the grief associated with watching Black folk be murdered
Mhm,
by a police state, et cetera, right? And I could only imagine how that re-traumatizes
mhm.
individuals, right? So I am really curious, and I know I didn't put this as a possible question, but I
Well,
think
we're having tea. You know what happens when we sit and we sip tea.
we go wherever we need to go, right?
Water flows.
Where it flows, right? And this is why I love it. But, I'm wondering what is it that we as a community can do in service of older Black women, right? Because if we think about it, African cultures, and again, I'm not generalizing, there is a special place for the elderly. We
Mhm.
don't just discard our elderly. We don't, and I make no judgments about people's
No, but
decisions.
that's where a lot of the guilt came in,
Mm,
for the
mhm,
caregivers and
mhm,
the elderly themselves, because when you can't get to them,
mhm,
there's guilt, because that's our responsibility. We take
mhm,
care of our elderly.
mhm, mhm,
They're to be with us. And
mhm,
even if they're in nursing homes or whatever in the hospital, we are to be there
mhm.
monitoring and helping to care for them. And when you
Mhm,
can't do that, that causes a lot of guilt,
mhm, mhm,
shame. and all of the other things that go along with that. So,
Mhm.
yeah, there's a lot of that.
Yeah. And, honestly, I experienced that because, my mother is in Barbados and she had autoimmune illnesses. So I had to be really, really careful. So
Mhm,
even if I
mhm.
wanted to go home, I also had that guilt about if I went home and I gave my mother COVID,
Right, right.
right? And the same thing with my elderly grandmother. I was so scared
Mhm,
about
mhm.
going home to see both of these people that were central in my life.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
to have COVID take that away,
Mhm, mhm,
I remember there were days where I just sat and cried
mhm.
because I didn't know what to do with the emotion. And I was like, if my grandmother died, if I died, my mother couldn't even come to my funeral.
Right, right. Now, I've experienced that
Mhm.
because right on the cusp of that, one of my brothers was hospitalized
Mm,
during that time. And it was like, even working in the hospital, they wouldn't allow us to visit.
mm,
My daughter found it really hard because she was in pharmacy and she went,
mhm.
they were like, if you're not doing anything with medications or whatever, I don't care your status or anything, you can't be up here.
Can't be there.
And so that was really hard to just have to send him things, and
Mm,
not be able to interact. And
mhm.
so it's like, they feel a sense of abandonment. We're feeling a sense of, I've abandoned them. And it's like, oh my gracious. So it created a lot of angst and paranoia too,
Mhm, mhm,
because like, oh, I don't, you
mhm.
know, um, I don't want to bring anything, like you said. I'm afraid if I brought something to somebody else. And my line is, I don't want to take anything home with me that I didn't come out with.
That was here's your sister. Here is your sister. And oh boy, working through that was a challenge in and of itself, right? He's like, I'm not going
Yeah,
nowhere, I'm not doing anything, I'm not touching anything.
right, right. And so it makes you neurotic.
Yes, if you're not careful, it was easy to go down that path mentally. I agree with you.
Mhm, mhm.
What lessons have we learned from the pandemic that can help us to improve mental health support for this group moving forward? How do we even begin to think about supporting them and their mental health?
It comes with conversations.
Mm,
We know what we just experienced on a large scale.
mhm,
And so, as caregivers, as aunties, nieces, grandchildren, the older adults, even though they're older, they're human.
mhm,
Let's have some
mhm,
conversations.
mhm, mhm,
Should this happen or even ongoing?
mhm,
What do we do? How do we communicate? What's the game plan? And
mhm,
that game plan is we're going to have these conversations. We're going to have these check ins. How can I help? How can I support you? What's going on? What are we
mhm,
doing to attend to your mental health?
mhm.
And how does that happen? It happens with self care,
Right, right. Mhm,
checking in every day.
mhm,
What's happening with your emotional well being? How are you nurturing that?
mhm,
What are you noticing with that? Checking
mhm,
in with your mental health. Yeah, I
mhm,
mean, your mental well-being. Did you
mhm,
challenge your brain today?
mhm,
Did you
mhm,
teach somebody something? Did you learn something?
mhm, mhm, mhm,
Physically?
mhm,
Hey, grandma. Hey, auntie. You
mhm.
drinking water?
Right, right.
Did you get up and did you walk around a little bit?
Mhm, mhm,
How are you managing your physical well-being? Gonna
mhm.
help with some groceries so that you
Right.
have a balanced diet. And then your spiritual well-being. What's speaking to your soul?
Was speaking to your soul. Yes, yes.
Yeah,
Mhm,
be it a song, be it a piece of music. Did you, notice a vibe or whatever that just made you sway?
I
Um,
love how you're swaying right now.
I'm speaking to my well-being, my spiritual well-being.
I love how you embody what you're telling us to do, but keep telling us what to do.
But I think that is the key
Mhm,
every day. for everybody. And I think that will be helpful because as we notice these things, we're more able to attend to them. If I notice that I'm being sad a lot, what is that about? What's going on?
Mhm.
And just checking in with that. If I'm happy, it doesn't always have to be sadness.
Mhm.
If I'm happy, what made me laugh?
Mhm.
You know,
Right. Right.
and just reflecting on that and sitting with that for a moment
Mhm.
because that's going to tell me, oh, I haven't laughed in a while. That
Right.
feels really good,
Mhm.
and just try to reinforce those things. So I believe that that type of self-care is what's going to keep us and help us to maintain
Mhm.
our mental well-being,
Mhm.
our
And what
mental.
I'm hearing from you is that self-care is to pause and ask a question, not to necessarily do. Because I think sometimes in society, we think self-care means that we're doing.
Right, right. Oh, I went to get my nails done. I got my hair done,
Mhm.
all of these things. No, ma'am. That's superficial. When you went to get your nails done and your hair done, did you relax in that moment? Did you fall asleep? Were you able to smell the smells and just
Mhm.
probably not? So that wasn't
Mhm.
self-care.
Right, right. Because you
When
want
I
peace
go,
of
that means I
presence.
trust where I'm going.
Mhm.
And when I don't talk to me
Mm.
and
Mm.
you will see me, it's like, okay, I'm out.
Right. You're able to sink into the inner body and allow it
Mhm.
to relax.
Right. It's about nurturing. That's what
Mhm.
self-care is. It's about
Yeah.
nurturing ourselves and it's not selfish.
Right, right.
What's selfish is when we don't do those things because then we become a burden on somebody else to care for us. If we don't practice self-care and take care of ourselves first,
Mhm.
then we become dependent.
Right, right. So as we begin to wrap up, I mean, you as the young people will say, you dropped some bars today, right? But as we begin to wrap up, if you could tell us one thing
Mhm.
you want us to know about being Black, elderly, and COVID-19 and mental health, anything around that spectrum or something outside of that, what is that one thing you would like to share with us?
It goes back to the self-care and community. It's the most valuable thing that we can have. Just in saying it, like I said, the words are powerful. In
Mhm.
saying it and feeling it, it helps our nervous systems to relax. And that's what we need. We need our nervous systems to be on track in that window of tolerance so that we can think outside of that and make knowledgeable decisions about life moving forward. For me, I believe that is key.
Mhm.
And community comes in with that because we can't practice self care by ourselves.
Mhm.
We need community to help and participate
Right, right,
because my emotional well-being is dependent on how you show up for me sometimes.
right, right.
Um,
You're not meant to walk alone.
right, right, exactly. And if we all do our part in that, then we're not isolated. We stay connected. We
Mhm.
stay in that caring state, that human state, and the trusting state
Mhm.
because we have unity.
Right, right,
And there's power there. And we
right.
always want to maintain our power.
I love how you talk about unity within the individual and then unity interrelational, right?
Mhm,
And that we
mhm,
need both, not just for moments of a pandemic, but just all moments of life.
mhm,
That's
mhm.
beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you
you.
for having me.
My pleasure. Thank you for sipping tea with me today.
I love it. I love it. Let it flow.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for engaging in this conversation. I encourage you to take a moment to reflect on all you have heard and to think of your story. For more stories, resources, to contribute, and for updates on the larger Black Women Talk COVID project, I invite you to visit the website blackwomentalkcovid.com. That's blackwomentalkcovid.com. Remember to take care of your spirit. Until we meet again.